is the new 2025 Nissan Murano, and it's a mid-size crossover with two-row seating, which is an interesting place to be because most people prefer 3 rows here. Sales numbers prove that. The Murano had been a success years ago, but its sales have declined significantly since. However, Nissan now has a brand new one to try to win people back. Today, I'm going to review the new Murano and show you all of its quirks and features. Summer is here, and with it comes road trips, beach days, backyard barbecues, and a lot of extra spending. Between gas, food stops, and stocking up on the basics, it all adds up fast. I just did my annual cross-country drive coast to coast, and I used Upside the entire way. From fill-ups to food stops, I was getting cash back the whole time, and I must say, it made a real difference. Upside gave me a little money back every time I swiped my card, and over the course of the trip, that adds up. If you haven't tried it, here's how it works. You just open the app, find an offer for nearby gas, groceries, restaurants, claim it, pay like normal with your card, and boom, cash back shows up in your account. You can transfer it right to your bank, PayPal, or grab a gift card. There's no points, there's no confusing rewards, just actual money. Upside has over 100,000 spots on the app, so you're probably already near a gas station or a restaurant that uses it. I used Upside at random spots all throughout the middle of nowhere and at places I go all the time. Top Upside earners are making as much as $300 a month. To find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside and use code DOUG to get an extra 25 cents back for every gallon on your first tank of gas. Or scan the QR code here to claim the offer. That's code DOUG to get an extra 25 cents back for every gallon on your first tank of gas. I've been using Upside for a while, especially on that big summer road trip, and it felt like easy money on stuff I was already going to buy anyway. If you're not using Upside, you're leaving money on the table. All right, time for the quirks and features of the new Murano, which is fully redesigned for the 25 model year. And with this redesign, the Murano enters its 4th generation. Now, this car was a huge deal when it came out back in 2003. I remember it had crazy styling, very head-turning. It made a big splash. And sales have been relatively strong over the years, although it peaked about 10 years ago with around 84,000 sales here in the United States. Last year, Nissan only sold around 19,000 units of the Murano, so sales are certainly on the decline, which isn't really that surprising because the 2-row midsize SUV segment is no longer especially popular. Most other rivals in this segment have either gone away completely, like the Toyota Venza and the Ford Edge, or they've been redesigned to add 3-row seating, like the Jeep Grand Cherokee, which now has a longer L version with 3 rows, or the Hyundai Santa Fe, or the popular 2-row midsize SUVs or off-roaders like the Toyota 4Runner, the Jeep Wrangler, and the Ford Bronco. With that said, there are still a few vehicles left in this segment, specifically the Honda Passport and the new Toyota Crown Signia, and those will be the closest competitors for the Murano. Now, it is worth pointing out, back to the off-roaders in this segment, that Nissan had a 2-row sort of mid-size SUV off-roader to compete with the 4Runner years ago. It was called the Xterra, and since the Xterra left about 10 years ago, Toyota has managed to sell more than 1 million 4Runners here in the United States, and Nissan hasn't come back with a new Xterra. So I'm surprised to see them focusing on the Murano in this sort of shrinking segment instead of the wildly popular off-roader space where the 4Runner and the Bronco have been huge hits. But nonetheless, that's where this car is, and so let's take a look at the quirks and features. We start under the hood, where the Murano is changing powertrains. The previous generation Murano had a V6. In fact, all previous Murano models have been powered by a V6, but the new version is switching to a turbocharged 2-liter 4-cylinder. Interestingly, power is dropping from 260
260 horses in the outgoing model to 240 horses in the new one. Smaller engine, less power will surely mean improved fuel economy, but Murano purists might be angry that the V6 is going away. Now, front-wheel drive is standard in the base version of the Murano, but all-wheel drive is standard on the SL, that's the mid-trim model, and the Platinum, that's this one. Pricing for the base Murano starts around $42,000, and it goes into the high 40s, low 50s if you want the higher trim levels. That actually means that the Murano is less expensive than its Honda Passport and Toyota Crown Signia rivals, but it makes the Murano more expensive than the Nissan Pathfinder, which is Nissan's other midsize SUV. Now that's interesting because the Pathfinder is more powerful, it has 3-row seating, and obviously it's bigger inside. But the intent for the Murano is to be the more premium offering. It's not as big or as practical as the Pathfinder, but it's intended to be nicer. And indeed, looking at it on the outside, that is very clearly the case. This is an attractive SUV and a premium looking one. It almost looks like something from Lexus or Acura with its use of chrome trim and just general overall design. It looks good, high quality, nice and luxurious compared to the more kind of everyman family car Pathfinder. And beyond the upscale general look of this car, there are some interesting quirks on the outside to drive home its premium point and to turn heads. One is the running lights, which are these horizontal sort of wings that come off the grille. They are certainly distinctive. They look kind of cool actually, and they definitely give this car an interesting look coming from the front. Also interesting in front, of course, you have the Nissan logo up front, no surprise, but you also have Murano printed into this sort of front panel kind of off to the side. For those who notice it, they'll know exactly what this is from the front. Now in back, Nissan also has a couple of cool things. One is the light bar design in this car. You can see it spans basically the entire rear end, only broken up in the center by the Nissan logo, but also it has kind of an interesting design. You have these horizontal light bars in the back that kind of increase in width as they go to the sides of the car, and there's sort of an interesting design in them. Again, a very characteristic and distinctive look. And also an interesting touch back here is the hidden trunk opener button. They've actually hidden the button within the Nissan logo. You can see it's mounted right here, so you don't have some ugly handle in the back that you pull on and it looks bad. Instead, the hidden button is nicely concealed. But where you really see the Murano's premiumness is on the inside. This Platinum model has a pretty high-end, high-quality interior. You look around and there's some nice materials in here for a Nissan. Take a look, for instance, at the seat. You can see this sort of patterned stitched leather, which looks very good. These seats are also very comfortable. They're nice to sit in, and looking everywhere else in the interior, very few cheap plastics around here. Instead, you got nice materials everywhere, a lot of stitching, high quality stuff. This looks like a nice place to be, this interior. And speaking of the high-end touches in this interior, one thing I absolutely love is the climate controls, which are not buttons. Instead, they're hidden. They're on this panel, and when the car is off, you can't see them. But when you turn the car on, they all light up and become the climate controls. And again, you don't have kind of ugly buttons in here. You have these lights kind of projected out of a panel, which look nice, the kind of thing you'd expect from a high-end premium car. And there are some other nice and interesting touches in here. For example, the next track button is hidden here in the center control stack. It's right next to the volume knob, which is in the very center, and it's sort of hidden. It almost looks like a piece of the climate control trim because it continues that line, but instead it's right here, your next track and your previous track buttons. Kind of cool. Now in the center console, you have some other interesting controls. Your gear selector is just a few square buttons, P, R, and D, right in the center. Gone are the days with the old clunky shift knob. They've now distilled this down into some small individual buttons, which obviously increases your storage capacity here in the center console. And speaking of storage capacity, there are two levels to this center console. You can see the lower level is actually a storage compartment, which is obviously nice and practical, adds more storage inside the car. And then on the second upper level, you have additional storage, a wireless charging pad, cup holders, and a surprisingly large center console storage area under this lid. Now, your other interesting items in here, the switch marked D mode, that stands for drive drive mode. I'm not sure why they felt they had to abbreviate it, but they did, and you can switch between your drive modes here. The thing I like the most, though, in the center console is the button for the camera. You push that, and instantly it pulls up the camera system on the center screen, which is fantastic because if you're trying to park into a tight space, a lot of cars, you got to go into some menu to find the camera. Here, you just press a button, the camera comes up, and this car has a surprisingly good camera system. It shows a lot of different angles, and there's a 3D camera where you can see from all around the car. But probably the very best camera feature is the invisible front end feature, where you go to that section of the camera and then the car will actually show you what's underneath it, making the front end seem invisible, which is especially good for parking in tight spots, or if you don't want to roll over a curb or anything else, you can see exactly where your vehicle's positioned and where your tires are. That is a great feature to have, and it's surprising to see it in a Nissan. But anyway, next we move on to the infotainment system in this car, and this car has one giant screen component, as you can see, but it's actually split into two different screens, the center screen and the gauge screen. The center screen is a pretty excellent system. It thankfully does not integrate the climate controls like I showed you. Those are mounted below on that panel, those cool buttons that light up, but unfortunately the infotainment does integrate your heated seat controls. And that means to turn on the heated seat, you have to go into the center screen in order to do it. It's not just some simple button. Now, strangely enough, there is a specific dedicated button to turn on the heated steering wheel, which you can do here to the left of the steering wheel, and there's even a dedicated button to turn on the massaging seats. You press here and the seat massage comes on, which gives you an idea of just how premium this vehicle is intended to be with its massaging seats. But again, for the heated seats, you gotta go into the screen. However, the screen is pretty easy to use and it has some pretty impressive features. For instance, it is included with Google Maps and Google Assistant, which makes your life easier when you're driving around. And of course, Google Maps is a fantastic app to use in car, and also Apple CarPlay and Android Auto included with this car. So you have basically all of the smartphone connectivity that you're gonna want inside this infotainment system. Add that to the excellent camera that I mentioned before. It's all pretty good, if only you had a specialized button for the heated seats. Now, the gauge cluster screen, the other part of this screen system, is also surprisingly excellent. I say surprising because Nissan's tech hasn't always been at the very forefront of vehicles, but this car really does impress. The gauge cluster is tremendously configurable, so you can have it show things larger, smaller, specifically indicate exactly what you want to see, and configure a map here, or your music, or vehicle information, kind of whatever it is you want to see in this gauge cluster screen. It's a pretty impressive one, and frankly, I wish a lot of other cars had gauge screens that were as configurable and as easy to use as this one. And I say easy to use because I absolutely love the way you can control the gauge screen and the center infotainment screen. Obviously, the center screen is a touch screen, but you can also control it on the steering wheel with this little wheeled dial button lineup over here. And the cool part is you can easily move between the gauge screen and the center screen by just tapping these little buttons on the bottom. The one on the left for the gauge screen, the one on the right for the center screen. And then if you don't want to reach over and touch screen, you can operate it using these dials and buttons on the steering wheel, which is pretty well done. One other interesting thing is this steering wheel dial is rotated. It's not straight up vertical and it's not horizontal. Instead, it's sort of 45 degrees at an angle, which I've never really seen before, and yet it works perfectly. With menus that are both horizontal or vertical, you somehow intuitively know exactly which way you want to swipe this dial. It's actually brilliant. They've created a solution for vertical or horizontal menu control by just twisting the little thumb dial that controls it. It makes perfect sense, and they've done it. I just wish other automakers would follow along and do the same thing. And next up, we move on to the back seat in the new Murano, which is shockingly roomy, I must say. This is a relatively small midsize SUV in that it's not a larger one with 3 rows. Wasn't thinking it'd be huge back here, but I have the front seat positioned where I would sit at 6'4", and in back, right behind it, I have knee room, headroom, legroom. It's all pretty good back here. So you don't get a third row, but you do get 2 roomy rows instead. And the back seat has some pretty nice amenities. For one thing, the same high quality leather with its nice stitching and patterns as you had up front that's carried into the back, which gives this a pretty premium feel. You also have a built-in sunshade in the window back here, which is nice for infants or people who generally dislike the sun. And you also have 2 USB-C ports for charging your devices, which is nice, and 2 heated seats for the 2 outboard rear seats, which is also nice to have. You can see there's also dedicated climate vents for rear seat passengers, which isn't always true in vehicles like this. That's nice to see. And rear seat passengers can also enjoy the panoramic sunroof a little bit more than you can up front, since you get to see the whole thing, and it gives you kind of this nice look out into the world above you. And finally, we move on to the cargo area in the new Murano. We press the hidden trunk popper button to open it up, and you get back here and you can see the cargo area is fairly large. Not huge, but good size for basically anything most people would want to carry around. And you have some extra benefits back here. For one, little storage compartments on the side of the cargo floor, as you can see, for smaller items, more fragile, valuable stuff that you don't necessarily want rolling around with the rest of your cargo. You also have latches back here that you can use to drop the rear seats. You can pull on those and the rear seats automatically come down. These aren't power operated, so you can't pull the seats back up from the cargo area, but it's nice to be able to drop them from back here. If you're carrying something heavy, you realize it doesn't fit, you don't have to go all the way around to the seats individually to fold them down, which is nice to have. Now, there is no additional storage under the cargo area floor in the Murano, but instead you have an inside mounted spare tire, which is actually a surprisingly rare thing to see and relatively nice to have. As someone who got a flat tire just a couple of months ago, the exterior under the car mounted spare is rather clunky and cumbersome to get out. It's nice to have one in here in case it ever happens, although it does rob extra cargo space that you may otherwise be able to use back there. So those are your Murano quirks and features. Now it's time to get it out on the road and let's see how it drives. All right, driving the new Murano, which is a surprise. It's a surprise that this vehicle exists in my mind. I mentioned earlier, but I mean, like I said, Toyota has sold 1.1 million 4Runners since Nissan canceled the Xterra, and the Murano did 19,000 units last year. And instead of trying to fight the 4Runner and all its success, they come out with a new generation of Murano, even as rivals are canceling these vehicles left and right. The Toyota Venza is gone, the Ford Edge is gone. It's interesting to me that this vehicle is out here. Now, I'm driving this, and I gotta say, my first impression just sitting in this for 5 minutes is that this is a nice car. The interior is nice. It's comfortable in here. It drives well. Like, it has a good seating position, a lot of glass. You can see out. You're sitting high enough. It's not some low crossover like some of these. It's got a good, relatively commanding seating position, and yet it's not too tall and overbearing and aggressive. It's a smooth ride. The powertrain could certainly be a little bit smoother. The problem with a 2-liter turbo 4-cylinder replacing a V6 is that ultimately the 4-cylinder has to work a little bit harder, which means you're going to get a little bit more noise as it kind of goes through the higher end of the rev range, whereas the 6-cylinder is just a smoother engine, and that is indeed the case here. And so when you're accelerating, honestly, even moderately, you can hear the engine work more than before, but also you can just sort of feel it. It's just a little bit harsher and rougher than you might want. And in a car like this that is specifically intended to be kind of like the luxury alternative to more rational, common cars like the Pathfinder, it's a shame you get that. Now, with that said, the transmission smoothness is really excellent. And again, the ride quality is excellent. So they've done a lot of stuff to make this car really stand out and feel smooth and comfortable in basically every way. But the powertrain, you can't really deny the fact that the powertrain just feels a little bit taxed and is a little bit loud and a little bit harsh. Other than the powertrain, though, it's hard to find complaints with the Murano, except for the fact that it's just not that appealing of a car to a particularly wide audience. It's a good car. Frankly, I thought the Venza was a really good car too. That came out in like 19 and has already been canceled in this exact market segment. There's just not a huge wide swath of buyers who are interested in vehicles in this segment. If there is a desire for a two-row mid-size SUV, it almost exclusively comes in the off-roader segment, like the 4Runner, the Wrangler, the Bronco, which sell in massive numbers, and not in the kind of, luxurified. People in this world tend to buy Lexus or certified pre-owned Lexus, or, like the RX is still a pretty hot seller in this segment. But vehicles like this, they just aren't. They're not what they were. Driving it around, I will say, it is comfortable. It is nice. It feels good. This seat feels comfortable. There's a lot of positive to say about this car. Nissan told me basically the target market is kind of empty nesters, people who are downsizing from a Pathfinder, want something nice but don't necessarily need the space. And I get that, and I think there will be some people who buy it for that reason, and frankly, I think they'll be satisfied. I think this is a good vehicle that has a lot of benefits, and that transmission really is smooth. And the interior really is nice, and the tech is not only good, but also easy to understand for those people if they're older. I think your drawback is really just that the market segment is not huge, and frankly, I think a lot of those people would probably be well served by getting a nicer trim level of the Rogue and saving what is probably $15,000 and getting a even smaller vehicle that still has sort of the seats for when they need it, but still having a lot of the equipment. This is nice. It's great. It really is. It's great. I don't see any drawbacks to this vehicle other than the fact that I really don't think that many people are going to be buying it or be interested in it. It's not a coincidence that basically all of the other rivals in this segment have either added 3 rows or been canceled entirely or gone off-roady. And this is kind of the last vehicle left being introduced into this segment trying to carry this torch, and I just don't really see it happening. And so that's the new 2025 Nissan Murano. Personally, if I was Nissan, I probably would have focused my efforts on an off-roader like the old Xterra instead of redesigning the Murano, and I probably would have given up on this in favor of the new Pathfinder, which is fairly competent actually. But if you're looking for a mid-size sort of premium crossover with 2-row seating, this is a well-executed one. It's pretty good. And now it's time to give the new Murano a DougScore.
And the DougScore is here, 45 out of 100, which puts the Murano here against rivals. Although it's dead last in this group, it's not a bad car. It's just a bit confused, delivering some premium touches at a relatively premium price point, but without a high-end brand name, and the lack of a third-row seat limits its appeal further. I like the Murano, but I much prefer the Pathfinder, which I think is a really strong, credible midsize SUV competitor, and unless the Pathfinder's slight size boost is a drawback to you, that's probably the one I'd recommend here.